On the evening of April 14th, 1865, the President of the United States entered Ford's Theater, not as a leader addressing his nation, but as a weary man seeking a few quiet hours of peace after 4 years of war. The laughter of the crowd filled the air. The nation was healing. The Civil War was finally over, and for the first time in years, hope hung in the air. Then, a single gunshot shattered the calm. In an instant, that hope turned to chaos. The laughter became screams, and history itself changed course. But what if that gunshot was only the final note in a much deeper symphony? A plot born not of one man's rage, but of organized secrecy, power, and vengeance. What if John Wilkes Booth wasn't the mastermind, but merely the last actor on a stage set by others? Tonight, we follow the trail into the shadows to uncover the plot bigger than Booth. This is the Lincoln Conspiracy, a reconstruction of one of America's darkest and most defining moments. We trace the steps of the assassin and the men who helped him, the frantic 12-day manhunt that gripped the nation, and the tangled web of motives that still divide historians today. Through diaries, military reports, trial transcripts, and secret correspondence, we follow the evidence, piece by piece, from the theater box where a president fell to the fields where his killer met his fate. It's a story of vengeance and politics, of loyalty and betrayal, and its unanswered questions still echo through the pages of American history. Before we continue, if you value deep historical storytelling and forgotten truths brought vividly to life, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps us keep uncovering the stories that shaped the world we live in today. By early 1865, Abraham Lincoln stood at the heart of a nation exhausted but still standing. He had carried the United States through 4 years of brutal civil war, a war that claimed more than 600,000 lives and left entire cities in ruins. He had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, pushed for the 13th Amendment, and dreamed of rebuilding the South through forgiveness, not punishment. But not everyone shared that dream. To former Confederates, Lincoln symbolized humiliation. To some Union politicians, his leniency felt like betrayal. To financiers and industrialists, his economic reforms threatened profit and control. And to extremists, his talk of black suffrage was an unforgivable, final insult. It was in this fractured atmosphere that John Wilkes Booth found purpose. A celebrated actor, adored on stage and admired in society, but offstage he was consumed by Confederate loyalty and wounded pride. Booth believed the South's defeat was not the end, only a pause. He told friends that something decisive had to be done, something that would avenge the Confederacy and restore its honor. The stage was set. The actors were already in place, and history was moments away from tragedy.
April 14th, 1865. Morning sunlight fell across Washington as word spread. President Lincoln would attend Ford's Theater that evening. To John Wilkes Booth, this was destiny. For months, he had plotted not to kill, but to kidnap the president, to use him as leverage to revive the Confederacy. He had gathered men, weapons, maps, and escape routes. Meetings were held at Mary Surratt's boarding house, supplies hidden, horses prepared. But when Richmond fell and Lee surrendered, Booth's dream of exchanging Lincoln for Confederate prisoners died with it. Desperation took its place. Booth's plan changed overnight from abduction to assassination. That night, he organized a three-part strike. Lewis Powell would attack Secretary of State William Seward. George Atzerodt would assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson. And Booth himself would kill President Abraham Lincoln. At 10:15 p.m., inside Ford's Theater, Lincoln laughed at a line in the play Our American Cousin. Booth slipped silently into the presidential box, aimed his Derringer pistol, and pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Lincoln behind the ear. In that instant, laughter turned to panic. Screams filled the theater. The president slumped forward. Booth leapt over the railing, his spur catching the flag, and crashed onto the stage, shattering his leg. But even in agony, he rose, turned toward the crowd, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," to thus always to tyrants. He vanished into the chaos. Outside, his horse waited. Booth mounted, wincing from pain, and galloped into the night. By dawn, he had crossed the Navy Yard Bridge and disappeared into Maryland. There he met David Harold, his accomplice, the two riding south into the shadows of history. But where did they go next? Who helped them? And how did investigators trace their movements so fast? Because within hours, the largest manhunt in American history had begun, and the chase for John Wilkes Booth was already tightening.
Before dawn, military authorities recognized the truth. This was no isolated act of vengeance. It was a coordinated attack against the Union's leadership itself. At Mary Surratt's boarding house, detectives found rifles, ammunition, and coded correspondence. Witnesses placed Booth there in secret meetings with known Confederate agents. Telegraph operators transmitted urgent descriptions across the country. Actor John Wilkes Booth, armed, dangerous. Posters were printed before sunrise. Evidence mounted. Confederate contacts traced to Montreal, where Booth met agents involved in wartime sabotage. Safe houses and escape routes stretching across Maryland into Virginia. Sympathizers ready to hide him, feed him, and guide him. While surgeons fought to save Lincoln's life at the Peterson House, the government mobilized every available soldier. Troops patrolled the roads. Bridges were watched. Farmhouses searched. Boats along the Potomac inspected. Still, Booth remained just ahead, limping, fevered, determined. For 12 days he fled across the countryside, driven by conviction and haunted by pain, believing history would remember him as a hero of the South. But with each passing hour, the noose of pursuit grew tighter. The government wanted not just justice, it wanted vengeance, and Booth's name was about to become legend. 12-day manhunt began. Day 1, the flight from Washington, April 14th to 15th night. At 10:30 p.m., only minutes after the gunshot at Ford's Theater, John Wilkes Booth rode hard through the night, his legs shattered, his mind racing. As he reached the Navy Yard Bridge, guards challenged him. Booth smiled, calm and confident, the charm of an actor masking the desperation of a fugitive. He was waved through. Moments later, David Harold followed. Together, they vanished into the dark backroads of rural Maryland. Booth believed he had escaped. He hadn't. Within the hour, word spread across Washington. The president has been shot. Telegraph lines crackled with alerts. The War Department mobilized. Rewards were posted. Suspicions spread like wildfire. Anyone who had ever spoken kindly of the South was suddenly under watch. The manhunt had begun. Day 2. Dr. Samuel Mudd, April 15th, before dawn. Just before dawn, Booth and Harold reached the isolated farmhouse of Dr. Samuel Mudd, a country physician and quiet Confederate sympathizer. Booth collapsed inside, his leg swollen and twisted. Dr. Mudd examined the injury, set the bone, and provided a crude wooden crutch. Did Mudd recognize the assassin in his parlor that morning? History still argues the point. But one thing is certain: his decision sealed his fate. By sunrise, Booth and Harold were gone again, leaving behind only blood-stained bandages and suspicion.
Days 3 to 5. Lost in the marsh. April 16th to 18th. Booth's grand plan quickly unraveled. The two fugitives became lost in the marshlands near the Potomac River, circling the same paths again and again, cold, hungry, and exhausted. Their compass failed. Their confidence cracked. Their only guides now were Confederate sympathizers and a few local ferrymen willing to risk everything for a cause already lost. Meanwhile, across the region, 10,000 Union soldiers spread out across Maryland and Virginia. Families were interrogated. Homes were searched. Safe houses raided. The panic was national. People whispered Booth's name in fear. The government's message was clear: no one who helps him will be spared. Booth's leg worsened. His spirit began to fracture, and every passing hour brought his hunters closer. Days 6 to 10. The Last Refuge. April 19th to 25th. Witness accounts from these days are fragmented, contradictory, confused. Some claimed he saw Booth limping through the woods. Others swore he never was there. Some offered him food. Others pretended not to see. But the truth eventually surfaced. Booth and Harold crossed the Potomac into Virginia, where Confederate loyalty still flickered faintly among the ruins. They found refuge at Garrett's farm, a quiet homestead near Port Royal. To Booth, it felt like safety, a final stronghold for a Southern hero. He still believed songs would be written about his sacrifice. But the Confederacy was gone. Its armies surrendered, its leaders in hiding. Booth's world had ended, and he didn't know it yet.
Day 11 to 12. The final stand. April 26th, just before dawn, Union cavalry closed in on Garrett's farm. The barn door was locked. Inside, Booth and Harold waited, exhausted, armed, surrounded. When ordered to surrender, Harold gave up immediately. Booth refused. He shouted that he would never be taken alive. The soldiers set the barn ablaze. Flames roared upward, glowing against the early morning sky. Inside, Booth stood silhouetted, revolver in hand, face lit by fire. Through a crack in the wall, Sergeant Boston Corbett aimed and fired. The bullet struck Booth in the neck. He collapsed to the ground, paralyzed, whispering words no one fully caught. Witnesses leaned closer. Some said he murmured, "Tell my mother I died for my country." Others only heard two final, fading words, "Useless, useless." At sunrise, Booth was dead. But his death did not end the questions. Had he truly acted alone? Or had powerful men, hidden in shadows, helped script the final act of Lincoln's life?
The morning after Lincoln's death, America awoke in silence. Shops shuttered their doors. Flags hung in mourning black. In every major city, church bells tolled for hours. In Washington, thousands gathered outside the White House, some weeping openly, others too stunned to speak. Abraham Lincoln, the man who had carried the Union through 4 years of blood and division, was gone. The laughter of Ford's Theater had turned to the echo of a nation's grief. Meanwhile, in secret, John Wilkes Booth's body was taken to Washington. It was quietly identified by dental evidence and laid in an unmarked grave within the old penitentiary grounds. Few were told where, even fewer were allowed to see it. The focus of the government shifted swiftly. Find every accomplice, uncover every link, punish every name. Within days, the dragnet spread across the East. Agents stormed boarding houses, farms, and taverns in search of anyone tied to Booth. Mary Surratt, widow and owner of the Washington boarding house where Booth and his circle had met, was among the first arrested. Alongside her were Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, David Harold, and Dr. Samuel Mudd, the physician who had set Booth's broken leg after his escape from Washington. Surratt's son John slipped through the net, vanishing overseas to Europe. The arrests sent shockwaves through the capital. Ordinary citizens whispered that any wrong word might lead to a charge of treason. Newspapers demanded vengeance, and beneath the headlines, a question lingered. Was this truly the work of one actor and his small circle, or the edge of a deeper, hidden conspiracy?
What next is the beginning of the tribunal. The government moved quickly. A military tribunal, not a civilian court, was convened in May 1865. Why military justice? Because the assassination was declared not merely murder, but an act of war against the United States. Over 7 weeks, more than 300 witnesses took the stand. The evidence was uneven, some clear, some contradictory. Yet the verdicts seemed to form long before the final testimony. Lewis Powell admitted he had attacked Secretary of State William Seward, but denied any broader plot. George Atzerodt claimed he had lost his nerve and never intended to kill Vice President Johnson. Dr. Samuel Mudd insisted he had treated Booth purely as a patient, unaware of his crime. Mary Surratt, calm and resolute, maintained her innocence to the end. Despite pleas for mercy, on July 7, 1865, Mary Surratt, Powell, Harold, and Atzerodt were hanged at the Washington Arsenal. Mary Surratt became the first woman ever executed by the U.S. federal government, a decision that has divided historians ever since. The remaining conspirators, Dr. Mudd, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Loughlin, were sentenced to hard labor at Fort Jefferson off the coast of Florida. The case was officially closed. But in the streets and in the pages of the press, few believed the full truth had been told. Theory begins to emerge.
In the weeks that followed the executions, the silence filled with speculation. In taverns, coffee houses, and newspaper columns, rumors spread like wildfire. Some swore Booth had escaped the Garrett farm alive, that the man killed and buried under guard was a look-alike. Others whispered that the conspiracy ran deeper, far beyond Booth's band of loyalists. Then fragments of evidence began to surface, files recovered from Confederate archives in Richmond and Montreal. Records suggested that Confederate secret agents had met with Booth months before the assassination, discussing plots to kidnap Lincoln, disrupt Northern infrastructure, and demoralize the Union public. No document directly tied the Confederate government to Lincoln's death, yet the patterns were too deliberate to ignore. And soon darker questions began to take shape. Was Booth's diary altered before it was presented as evidence? Why were 18 pages mysteriously missing? Why was the trial rushed under military secrecy? Who destroyed the intelligence reports that could have revealed more names? By the end of 1865, America had buried its president, executed its killers, and sealed away the story. But the doubts never faded. Behind the official verdict, something larger, more coordinated, more deliberate seemed to glimmer just beyond reach. And that's where the next chapter of our investigation begins. The theories. Who may have truly stood behind the gun that ended Abraham Lincoln's life?
Theory 1. The Lone Actor.
The official story remains clear, at least on the surface. John Wilkes Booth acted alone. A man driven by wounded pride, Southern loyalty, and a dangerous thirst for fame. Booth's personal writings, found in his pockets and lodgings, leave no doubt about his hatred for Lincoln. He called the president a tyrant. He believed the Civil War had not ended, it had simply changed its stage. And in his mind, he was destined to deliver its final act. He made the decision. He chose the moment. He hand-picked his accomplices. None of them powerful men, just loyalists and dreamers. And when the time came, he pulled the trigger himself. No surviving Confederate orders mention his name. No letter from Richmond calls for Lincoln's death. No general or agent was ever conclusively tied to the planning. On paper, it was the crime of one furious man. But paper does not always tell the truth. If Booth truly acted alone, how did 3 coordinated attacks unfold within the same hour, each targeting a different government leader? How did Booth arrange a network of safe houses stretching across multiple states? And why are 18 pages missing from his personal diary, torn out after his death? The lone actor theory explains his emotions, his obsession, his hunger for fame, his fury, but it struggles to explain his precision, his coordination, his reach. Perhaps Booth believed he was the sole author of history's stage, but the evidence whispers of others. Actors in the shadows, uncredited and unseen, writing lines that Booth merely performed.
Theory 2. The Confederate Secret Service. Booth's Confederate ties ran deeper than most Americans realized.
Before the war ended, he had spent time in Montreal, a known hub for Confederate Secret Service activity. There, he met with operatives who openly discussed kidnappings, sabotage, and plots against Union leadership. They called it asymmetric warfare. Confederate archives, what remains of them, confirm covert missions in Washington. Documents recovered after the war list shipments of weapons, coded funds, and spy movements that mirror Booth's own travels. Even the original kidnapping plan to seize Lincoln and exchange him for Southern prisoners matches Confederate operational patterns. When the Confederacy collapsed, those same agents didn't vanish overnight. Some fled north. Some melted into the shadows of cities like Washington and Montreal, and Booth stayed in contact. What we don't have is the one piece of paper, the direct signed order to kill Abraham Lincoln. But when Richmond fell in flames, Confederate records burned with it. Letters, ledgers, directives, all reduced to ash. So does the absence of a document prove there was no link? Or does it simply mean the evidence was destroyed? Historians remain divided, but many agree that Booth's plan aligned closely with Confederate intelligence operations. If not directly commanded, it may have been at least encouraged, a collaboration built not on formal orders, but on shared revenge.
Theory 3. Political factionalism within the Union. By 1865, America was victorious, but divided, now within the North itself. Abraham Lincoln envisioned reconciliation, a return of the Southern states under lenient terms. But radical Republicans in Congress feared mercy would allow the old power structures to return. They wanted control, justice, and in some cases, retribution. Then came Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's vice president, a Southern Unionist with harsher Reconstruction instincts. On that night, George Atzerodt had been assigned to kill Johnson. But Atzerodt never acted. He drank himself into paralysis and fled. And earlier that day, Booth left a note for Johnson at his hotel, a gesture historians still debate. Why would a killer warn his target? Was Booth signaling someone or something? Security around Johnson that night was curiously lax. His movements were less guarded than the president's. Within hours of Lincoln's death, Johnson assumed the presidency, and Reconstruction took a different course. Still, no credible evidence links Johnson or any Union faction directly to the assassination. The timing and coincidences intrigue, but they do not prove conspiracy. Most historians label this possibility politically plausible, historically unsubstantiated.
Theory 4. Economic motives. Power is rarely only political. It is also financial. During the war, Lincoln supported greenbacks, government-backed currency, and measures that limited the influence of certain private financial interests. He challenged war profiteering, canceled some corrupt contracts, and proposed economic policies that threatened entrenched moneyed interests. As the nation looked to rebuild, enormous fortunes were at stake. Railroads, land, industry, reconstruction contracts. Lincoln's moderation threatened those profits. He wanted peace, not plunder, reconstruction, not exploitation. Did powerful economic actors conspire to remove him? There is no hard evidence, no letters, no financial paper trail that connects financiers directly to Booth's plot. Yet the result of Lincoln's death was undeniable, a shift in national priorities that opened wider doors for industrial expansion and private gain. A motive does not equal involvement, but it adds another layer to the storm. Behind flags and speeches, money often moves quietly, in the dark.
Today, most scholars agree. No single hand wrote the script of Lincoln's assassination. It was not just Booth's hatred, not solely Confederate revenge, not purely political factionalism, nor only economic interest. It was a collision of all of these, a moment when war, loss, ambition, and fear converged. By April 1865, the United States was a fractured nation held together by exhaustion. Booth embodied that fracture, a man of privilege and obsession, caught in the echo of a dying cause. He believed himself the hero of a second revolution, but he was really its ghost. The assassination was not the act of a single mind, but of a historical moment, a flash in which rage, ideology, and desperation found an outlet. Booth was neither puppet nor solitary mastermind. He was the spark in a powder room already full of smoke.
What makes the Lincoln assassination so complex is not only what we know, but what we may never know. When Richmond burned, thousands of Confederate documents vanished, witness accounts conflicted. Booth's diary was found missing 18 pages. The military trial moved quickly in a nation still reeling. So much evidence was lost, destroyed, or never collected. And in those gaps, theories have multiplied for more than a century. John Wilkes Booth thought he would be remembered as a patriot. Instead, history remembers a man whose act achieved nothing but sorrow. His shot did not restore a lost cause. It only deepened a national wound. If this investigation helped illuminate the past, if it deepened your view of these events, subscribe, share, and like to keep us uncovering the archives and the stories that shape our world. Next, we continue with another chapter of America's shadowed history. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Dallas, 1963. Join us as we keep examining the stories behind the headlines. History doesn't fade, it waits to be examined.